Thank you. All right, sit down, sit down. I didn't create this standing ovation for myself. It's a little awkward. I'm so glad to be here. This is 10 years of doing this, 10 years. And it's a little bit of a celebration for us, right? What's been interesting is there's been multiple times in the last 10 years that I wasn't sure if we were going to make it another year. Maybe you're in a startup right now that's in a similar place, right? I remember one of those times was at a Plywood Presents, and we were hosting it at the Tabernacle downtown. And some of you may have been there. One of the nights we had this idea, this great idea, of getting all the most thoughtful experts in the room to get on the Ferris wheel. And to get on the Ferris wheel, and they would sign up with 3 other people. How many of you were on that Ferris wheel? Okay. If you were on that Ferris wheel, it was an unforgettable moment in life. Am I right? Yes, okay. So the idea was everybody gets on the Ferris wheel. Each one, if you guys have been in one of these little Ferris wheels, there's 4 people in a little, I don't know what you call a bulb or something, whatever. Yeah, a circle thing. And you goes around a couple times, 15 minutes, you're off. So we had committed to all of the mentors in our community that just give 15 minutes, you're going to be with these 3 complete strangers, give a little advice, and then you get off. Well, they didn't get off. It just kept going in a circle and going in a circle. And about an hour later, with the same 3 strangers, people started getting off. And I showed up just at the time after that hour. I was expecting there had already been all these cycles. And instead, there was a lot of dizzy people, right? And so if you're there was that moment. There was other moments over the years where we didn't have it happen. But sometimes things go wrong, and that's part of the adventure. Am I right? Well, this was a picture I wanted to share of 10 years ago. And this was the exact picture. There was in a panel where someone on their phone, it was, I think, the original iPhone, took a picture from his lap. And I want to tell you about some of these people. The first one, the blue arrow, that's Greg Gilbert. And what's been interesting is there's these people in our community, and the problems that they've solved ever since is pretty amazing. He started something in Athens called My Athens. It became a community hub for the whole community. He also helped launch this coffee company called Thrive that's working with all different farmers all over the world. And this was Seth McLaughlin. Seth and his wife Renee started a clinic and a training center in Honduras. And it's sustaining on its own with locals there today. And over here, that's Leonce Crump. Leonce is a pastor here in Atlanta and started a church that a lot of people know of called Renovation Church. And back there in the back, the bald guy, you can barely see him, that was Brian Preston. He started an organization called Layman Luther that really gives jobs to homeless people in Atlanta area. And over there, I believe that's Stephen. Stephen came in today from Montgomery, and Stephen is part of a whole community starting to reimagine what that city of Montgomery could be and the story that they have and they could share with the world. And this is Carmen. Carmen, she's a photographer. She, coming out of this, started an entire documentary series documenting human trafficking all over the world, and he shared it in festivals everywhere. And over here, this was Scott Hofer. He started a leather company called Colson and Keene, and he said to himself, I'm tired of buying a new bag every year. I want to have a bag that can sustain my entire life. And back there in the corner, he's in a conversation while I'm speaking on stage. That was Brad Montague. He started something called Kid President that's inspiring kids all over the world. This is Wendy Dickinson. Wendy, coming out of this, was at the very first stages of starting a counseling center that's now in Buckhead that I think has 25 different counselors that's serving people every day. And that's Micah Dalton. If any of you guys are from Atlanta, he started something called the ATL Collective coming out of this, giving a platform for new artists in our city. And over there, that's a guy named Michael Tavani. He started something in Atlanta called Switchfoot. I'm sorry, not Switchfoot, that's a band, right? Switch Yards, which is an incredible community hub for our city. And I say this, why? Because I looked at this picture last week and I was like, man, I could go on for probably 30, 40 people. There's something powerful when people come in a room together. And that's what's happened for 10 years in a row. We challenged people 10 years ago with this idea. I don't know why I'm like choking up. That wasn't part of the preparation. We'll be known by the problems we solve. This was the emergence in social media, and we started challenging people that we felt like that if they started addressing problems with their lives instead of just building personal brands, something better could happen. And that's what's happened. So in the midst of that, I've been trying to figure out what I've become known for in the midst of this. And I think one thing I've realized in the midst of this entire work is that I think I've been contributing to the courage of others' purpose and the need for their community and the accountability for their rest. And I think that's what's sustained this organization and this community. Now, also during it, I've wondered if I should continue doing it. This year is one of those years for me where as a founder, I started wrestling with what we need most for our community. And so, man, we've launched a lot of things this year. And we're challenging what we think is possible. I'm struggling through it in the midst of it. We launched a building campaign 1 year ago, which if you're here at some point, on the other side of that wall, we will be there hopefully by the end of the year. We've raised $975,000 of $1.1 million. So if there's someone here that just wants to finish that last bit off, you can just raise your hand and we can get that taken care of. But doing a building campaign is hard, right? And in the midst of it, we're moving into a neighborhood that's wrestling with gentrification. As a white leader on this team, I'm wrestling with those tensions, right? Am I positively or negatively impacting my neighbor by the move, right? And in the midst of it, launched a project a year ago with my wife called Love or Work, which is just really easy to come to agreements on everything you should do on a project with your spouse, right? But it's been a fun project. And we're also launching a project in the next couple days that I think is going to have significant impact. In all the midst of this, we've really wrestled with this idea, for me, this word keeps coming to mind, of longevity. How have we been able to last for 10 years? I'm a creative guy. I'm a startup guy. So I'm really good at getting something to the first 2 years. And then all of a sudden, we lasted 10. And I thought about this a lot the last couple months, about what longevity is. Longevity is the willingness to persist, regardless of circumstances, for the sake of a greater purpose. You see, in the startup world, most startups do not make it, right? There's these fictitious numbers of 90%. But in general, most can't sustain, right? So we have found, over working with about over 500 projects now, what are the ones that have sustained? And it's people that are connected with the problem they're trying to solve. So when they run out of money, they're exhausted, they're tired, it affects their relationships. At the end of the day, the people that stay with it the longest, they can point to something in their life that matches up with that problem. And when that happens, regardless of circumstances, they're gonna keep going. They're gonna find that longevity. And you might be in that phase right now that you're needing that boost of longevity. I heard I read this quote. It's funny because I actually researched a lot about this quote, and it's not necessarily true that he said it. Apparently, Einstein has a lot of quotes on the internet that he may or may not have said, but we're going to go with it on this one. It's not that I am so smart, it's just that I stick with problems longer. The reality is, the longer I do this work, the less I feel like I'm an expert at it. The more like outliers that actually win. The ones you can't predict on the front end actually stay around longer. But whatever work you're doing, if you can just stay the course a little bit longer, you're going to be able to serve the people that you feel a sense of deep purpose and calling better. Longevity brings greater amounts of solutions. So over the last 10 years, I've realized there's like 3 things I want to share quickly with you today. 3 balances that have caused longevity for me. I know that's a weird thing to say. At different times, I've had to go in different ways. One is risk and responsibility. In everything I do, I'm battling this, and you probably are too, right? How much money do I have? Oh, but the payout could be huge, right? I have this great opportunity. Yeah, but it could affect my family. I have this idea, but what if, right? And in the midst of it, this is a tension that I'm always feeling, and you will too. There's been years in the last 10 years where I had board members that said, Jeff, you cannot do any new projects this year. you're done. Why? Because I had to be responsible for the team that I was leading and for this community and what it could handle. There was other times where I looked at my board and I looked at my close friends and I said, I don't care what you're going to say, we are all in and this is the year we're doing it, right? We had to have that balance of risk and responsibility. Sometimes courage is believing that if you wait, the opportunity is still going to be there for you at the right time. I don't like saying that, but it's been true over the last 10 years. So I ask you, how do we sustain while pushing for the next phase of the vision? This is a question that I consistently ask. What is the risk and what is my responsibility? Secondly, voices and relationships. So in the midst of this, there's been voices that all have an opinion about everything that you are supposed to do. Some of those voices are my own. Some of the voices are things I say to myself. I should go after this. I should not go after this, right? Sometimes there's fears. There's all these emotions that go along with that. And then there's these close relationships that have incredible advice. One thing I've realized over the last 10 years is some of the voices within me were wrong. And some of the voices externally and the relationships that were closest to me were also wrong. So at different times, you have to be willing to listen to both your voices internally and the voices that you respect greatly. So I ask you, who are the right people to listen to at this special moment in time? And the last tension I think that's led, or the last balance I think that's led to our 10 years of being around, is this balance between impact and influence. And this is a very hard debate that many people have had for many years. Do you take a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach? And I think it's important to have both, and I think that's led to the longevity of Plywood People for 10 years. As a person that gives advice to startups doing good, I have to have access to communities that they do not have access to make their ideas go further faster. It's a uniqueness that I bring to the table. But if I'm only hanging out with the most influential in the city, then I won't even know what the needs of the community are. And I think that that's been a core of who I am, of finding the people that are on the streets every day trying to address problems that a lot of people don't even know about, and then introducing them to the people that can really help make a difference with it. I remember the first time I heard this story was Dr. King. He used to say he'd walk out his front door and he'd see the poorest of the poor in the city, and he'd have meetings with the most influential in the city. And his responsibility was to bring those two people together because they both needed each other. And I think that's been a core that's lasted Plywood People for 10 years. So my question to you, how do we get the right people in the room at the right time to make significant change? Lastly, I want to tell you this story. Last fall, I was on this panel. This is down in Florida. I got asked to be on the panel with these three different there was like three other startup organizations. And the person next to me was telling this story about how they challenged their startup projects. And he said, so what we do is people come in the room and I sit down with them and I challenge them. How do you get from where you are in revenue right now to $2 billion in the next 3 years? He started talking about strategies with $2 billion. He wanted a double unicorn in 3 years, right? And I was sitting there next to him and I thought to myself, man, why am I on this panel? I don't know how to do that. I have no voice in this context, right? And 5 sentences later, he said this statement. Yeah, in the midst of it, this past year, 2 of the people in our community, the founders in our community, committed suicide. And then he went on again in his strategy. And I didn't listen to another thing he said. What was interesting to me is they asked me a question later, and I said I had to stop, and I was like, I can't go on without addressing this statement that the guy just said. It's like, he went from $2 billion to 2 suicides to next he went to strategy, and he just kept rolling, right? And I thought to myself, that is why I love the community of Plywood People. It's because it's not about how much money you make. It's about the lives that are impacted by the work that you are doing. It could be one life, and that matters. It could be one problem that you're willing to give time and energy into. And we have a group of advisors in this room that work towards helping these projects happen, and we have people that are giving their lives every day to bring some problem that they see to life. We're not like those other communities. We're about people. So as you're here the next 3 days, I want you to think about the person next to you. Think about how you can encourage their life, bring courage to the work that they're doing, how you can advise them in whatever experience that you have, how you can buy their lunch tomorrow and have a great conversation. Plywood People has always been about all of you in the seats, and I want that to continue the next 3 days. Thank you for being with me on this 10-year journey. We are only beginning. Thank you.